Hey there, Dango Stu here. Today's video is about installing the Vetus fuel filters and installing the ladder, and is proudly sponsored by MarineEngine.com. The week started by meeting up with Leon and Andrew. Leon was giving me a bit more help with the electrics, and Andrew was picking up an old Honda outboard that he'd actually swapped with me for the Detroit blower that's actually on the engine at the moment. So finally gave me a chance to return my half of the bargain. Because the boat's finally running, I went over to Parsley Bay to pick those guys up. Parsley Bay's relatively shallow, and it also turned out that we ended up there at low tide. All the prop marks on the bottom here make me nervous. I hope they're yacht keels. Makes me realise I've got to double check what I set this figure to, below the keel, depth of water. Let's have a look now actually. Auto range, oh yeah, settings. Here we go. Transducer. Okay, display depth as below transducer. Alright, I'm happy with that. We could say below keel, transducer distance above keel. He's probably about 10 centimeters, it's not far. Let's call it 20 to be on the safe side. Done. Done. So, right, so now it's saying we've got 0.5 of a metre below the keel. That sounds about right. Alright, I'm happier with that. A little bit more conservative, I think, to say that. The trials and tribulations of getting an outboard off Dango Island. Just getting an old Honda C, it's rubbish, but gearbox is good in a few bits and pieces, so just getting it to the mainland for Andrew. Do you want to just lock it off there so it's got the skeg?
Sit there, yeah. Just lock that off. That's all. Not already on it.
I think it's going to go anywhere it wants to, but yeah, that's fine.
Can't go far.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Alright, move that around a bit.
After Leon attached the other two wires on the ball mast smart shunt, we can only get the current draw and everything for the house bank, but this is the voltage on our 12 volt battery bank. So we can actually read the voltages on all of them now. So we got house bank, this is the starting bank voltage, this is the 12 volt house bank voltage. This reminds me, I'm welding up a bracket, outboard bracket for a mate. This bracket goes on the back of his yacht, and you drop the outboard down, and he thought the outboard had been stolen, but actually the bracket had broken and the outboard's gone in the drink. It was a while ago. It was a pretty cheap old 8 horsepower 2-stroke something, but it's still there, so that could be one of our first little dives to go see if we can find that, maybe even get it started again. Kind of fun. As a slight aside, there's a lot that happens, obviously, behind the scenes running a YouTube channel that you don't get to see. Everything from boring accounting to correspondence to equipment. At the moment, I'm trying to get a GoPro mount for a scuba mask, so I thought it might be interesting to other people. This is the one I found. What was it? Scuba Pro. Pretty cheap. And the idea is it attaches to a regular mask. And at first I thought it was going to be adhesive, and then I realised it comes with a cable tie, and I was like, how's that going to work? And it's actually kind of clever in some ways, so I'll show you. All it is these masks have their, you know, silicon section here, but you can actually feed a cable tie between the mask and the silicon seal. So that's what you do. Out of interest, I did actually buy a new mask because that one's a bit old and scratched and whatever. I did buy this mask, which is a Cressy mask, I think it was, yep. And it has a built-in GoPro mount. I thought that's cool. But this doesn't really fit me. Scuba masks are one of those funny things. You really got to try them on. If you put it on without a strap and it stays on, it's a good fit for your face. This one just falls off me. But it fits Paul, so he's going to use that one when we go diving. But buying a scuba mask online, yeah, I wouldn't recommend it. Because if it's not a good seal, because of the shape of the mask and the shape of your face, you can't crank the strap up and expect it to work. It's always going to leak and it's always going to be a nightmare. So I know that mask fits me, even though it's old, so let's give this a whirl. Inside here there was a channel this went through, so you come up here, then it's sort of, maybe even if you bend it a bit, then when you push this up through here, it guides itself quite nicely through. And then the usual cutoff. So I've got to say, you know, you could even maybe cut a bit of this plastic if you feel like it's in your vision. Let me have a look. You see it a tiny bit, but it's barely noticeable. So anyway, if you're wondering how the GoPro mounts happen, that's it. Just getting this last bit of line off a reel. I'm trying to kind of clean the boat up a little bit, just get as much stuff off the boat. Obviously emergency spares, important tools I'll leave here, but everything else just take it home. Because this line's just come off the reel, it's really kind of twisted, so I'm actually just gonna let it go with the outgoing tide, see if we can get the twist out. Plus when Pedley gets home, we might pick his prop up, so that'll add a bit of fun to the job as well. Generally what I'll do then is we've got the other end, the other bitter end of the rope, leave it hanging, grab top section, do a few wraps around. Then we've got, you know, the loop of the bundle. Take this end, make a loop, push the loop through like that. Then put the other end through the loop like that. Keeps it all nice and secure. Then you can use this just to lash it onto something with a clovitch or something. That way it's, you know, kept in control and ready for when you want to use it. The fittings for the fuel filter have finally arrived, so we're going to install it. And here's the Vetus fuel filter itself. Now, there's a few really good features with these fuel filters. The idea with these is that you have fuel coming in, running through one of the filters, then back out. Then, if that gets blocked or you need to change it, without even turning the engine off, you can open the second filter, close the first one, change out that first one, run with this filter. When this needs changing, swap back to the original. The idea is that you end up just flip-flopping between the two filters and you never need to turn the engine off in order to do that filter change. The big advantage to this is not so much with your annual servicing, you know, you change your filter every year or every 300 hours or whatever they recommend. The idea here is that you're at sea, you're offshore, and you've suddenly just picked up a big, you know, big section of glunk, some algae, whatever, and it's really blocked the primary filter. And if you turn the engine off to change that filter, very, very quickly you'll end up beam onto the sea, side on, and you're really at the mercy of the waves. You're much, much safer in a swell if you're motoring. So the idea is you go, oh, got a problem, let's go down there, open the second filter, close the first one, you know, the one we were currently using. You can just keep going then, that's all there is to it. If you wanted, you could change the filter, and I recommend it, change the filter straight away, because then if suddenly more gunk comes through, blocks the second one, you can flop back to your first one, etc. So really, it's not a convenience feature, it's a safety feature, and a really good one. If you have a problem at sea, one of the parts of the diagnostic process is to look at the gauge on the filters. If this filter is blocked, the fuel pump's trying to draw fuel out the out. If it can't do that, there's going to be this sort of partial vacuum being pulled. So if you see this filter in the yellow, time to change it. If you see it over here in the red, you've got a blockage. You know, maybe you've got a valve shut or whatever, but it tells you something's wrong with the flow of fuel between the fuel pump and the tank. All right, other features. Down the bottom here, we have the glass bowls where you can see water that gets collected. Water is heavier than fuel, and the idea is they form these currents, so the water gets pushed down first, so it actually has to rise up to get into the filter. So the idea is they push it down, it sort of settles in the bottom. If they're really fine, sort of, you know, droplets of water, the currents also cause them to coalesce, form larger drops and fall to the bottom, pretty much the same way rain does in clouds sort of thing. Then you can drain the water off the bottom. This is the thread sealant I've been using for all my oil and fuel fittings so far, so I'm going to keep using this. And we're going to use it to put our adapters on that go onto these threads. Then we have our fittings. Then we also have a couple of blanking plugs that go on the other two. So we're going to have one in, one out, and blank off the other two. So let's do that. All right, the obvious thing is the in comes from this side, so I'm going to blank off the in on this side and the out on this side. I'm just going to use a shifter on this because it's a little bit larger than my largest normal spanner and a bit smaller than my other set. So, all right, next up I'll just put these adapters on. These fittings come in straight or 9°. I think the 9° works best for my installation, so that's what I went with. The throttle for this needs reworking, you know, there's no drummers there. This throttle cable's too short. I want it to be much longer, come right back and come in. This bracket needs to be taller, which means spacing it out from the block so that the rocker cover doesn't hit it. More tweaks, but means that we'll get a straight run. There's currently that kink there I don't want. This old filter is held on by 2 nuts and bolts here. We'll reuse one of the holes for the new filter, but we'll need to drill a new hole further over as well. Okay, so far so good. Ooh. I may as well reuse these bolts. They're probably Imperial, or tiniest bit needs to come out of this bracket to get them to fit nicely. So I'll just run a drill through there. The magnet of this camera is not really sticking to it, so I'd say it's aluminium, so no real corrosion issues. Just drill that paint off, I think. All right, I'm going to cut this insulation back a little bit. I think we're going to have to move the filter this way. As well as being impossible to get to because of this water pipe, this oil filler is now actually in the way of the oil filter. So I'm going to try and knock it over, see if it is just a press fitting. Yeah, looks like it is. Now, this primer bulb I spent quite a lot of time trying to find because it's rated as diesel safe, which is relatively unusual. Like all primer bulbs, they work best when they're in this orientation with the arrow pointing up. So I'm going to have it sitting around about here. So I'll cut this hose too. I've got to go get a whole lot of hose clamps. I'm just pushing those on for now to get my arrangement. Something like that, I think. At this point I need to run up the road to go and buy a few more bits and bobs, some hose clamps and some metal. Bit of a sign of the times, literally. We've arrived. This place is perfect. You've basically got BJ Howe's here that do all sorts of welding and industrial stuff. And then right next door you've got Metal Land for all your kind of stock metal. The two of them together in my mind are BJ Land, and it's kind of a mecca for metalwork. All right, let's go inside and see if we can get some steel for mounting the winch and some aluminium for doing the awning. All right, got this bit of steel now, 12mm thick, so roughly half an inch. I bought this after talking to Damien from Brewpeg. He was saying rather than drilling through the wheelhouse, he would drill and tap a plate like this. The winch mounts with 6 bolts. Just drill, tap, bolt it on, and then weld this right round after radiusing the corners. That way you never actually go through the wheelhouse from a water corrosion point of view. And I've got to say, I like the idea. All right, these hose clamps are more than arguably too large, but this should be right. At least they're fully stainless. A lot of hose clamps you'll find will be stainless bands, but the actual worm drive mechanism won't be. With these filters, some just have, swapping levers. These ones you've got pretty much full control, a bit like driving a manual rather than automatic. We've got our in coming into this top rail, then we're going to let our in to this filter and out that way from this filter. So let's prime till we get fuel coming out that line. You can see the bottom clear bowl's full already. Probably take quite a bit of priming to fill the rest of the filter. As soon as we see it come down there though, we'll swap to the second one. So it's primed as well, and they're both kind of ready to go for the hot swap, should we ever need to. There we go, diesel coming out. So, turning that filter off. I could see from the gauge on the filters that the fuel pump was working hard to draw through these filters with that primer bulb in place. So now it's all been bled. I'm just going to remove the primer bulb to make it a little bit easier for the fuel to flow. Good morning. Going to do quite a bit of fabrication today. I'll show you the plan. Many people mentioned about putting just a brace across the doorway here, and yeah, I think it's a great idea. I'm actually going to start with some stainless flat bar that I've got in the workshop now. It's always great to use some spare bits you got. So I'm thinking of making it come along the deck and back, and then just the ladder welded onto the top of it. I think I can't see, it can't tip because the legs of the ladder press into the hull. So I think it's going to be all right. It's going to have plenty of strength this way because this is the bar coming this way. So I'm going to measure that up so that I can cut that at home and weld it up. What do we got? 1070. The returns, I'll make them 50mm or something like that. While I've got the tape measure out, what I'm also going to do is we've got our straight section of pipe that I'm going to put up here with the flapper valve on it. Means we're going to get rid of all this ugliness because it's this diameter, the pipe, the whole way through, so we're just going to put it straight into the muffler, remove all of this. But I'm just going to measure the distance from, say, about this far into the muffler up to about the same height, I think. Another thing I'm thinking for the ladder is having a way that I can, as well as hooking it down here, hook it onto the roof. A is perhaps somewhere to store it. I mean, obviously I can put the whole thing on the roof, but I thought maybe hanging from the roof and then lashed on somewhere as a good way to get up and down onto the roof of the wheelhouse. So that's something else that's sort of on my mind. So if we measure deck to the tip, 900 say. Another thing I want to do is measure the height of the mast, figure out what our air draft is. All right, now the wind's our friend, 1700. 1700, 1500, and just reach that. The exhaust, we said 900 to the top of the wheelhouse roof, which means we want to add at least 300. Let's call it 310 or 320, even if we want to come right in. You can always cut a bit more off. 320, so all up, that's 1220 for the exhaust pipe. Get down here out of the wind a little bit. There was a bit of conversation about whether you're cutting the deck in half by having the winch on the wheelhouse, and I don't think it was that clear really how much space there is and what the heights are like. Now, at the moment, we have a line coming from the bow roller down to our post here. I'm actually thinking now to keep the anchor rode more into the roller. We will come down quite low and have it go to about here. I mean, this is less than a foot. For me to step over that is a bit of a no-brainer, you know, it's nothing. When I spoke to Winch, they said that absolutely no problem, very versatile setup. You can have the rope come to the top of the drum, to the bottom of the drum, clockwise can be up, anti-clockwise can be up, you know, it doesn't matter. So I'm still thinking of going here. The other thing to consider is that you have to have, because it's a drum winch and it winds onto the drum, you have to have a minimum of a metre from the back roller when we extend the bowsprit to take the anchor. You have to have a minimum of a metre to the drum itself, and obviously more is better. A metre is kind of like here anyway, so you can't come forward, you can't mount it, you know, obviously I need the chain locker hatch to open. There really aren't that many choices. I think one argument people have is, when have you ever seen a winch attached to the front of a wheelhouse? And I go, well, never, but that's not a good reason not to do something. To me, it's like saying to Elon Musk, oh, when have you ever seen a car powered by electricity? They're all petrol, what are you doing? You know, and you go, well, the thing is, all these things are changeable. And one argument that I always have in these situations that I think makes sense, if you do the really obvious safe thing, it will work well enough that you'll never change it. If you do something that might work really, really well, and it does work, you've hit on something awesome. If you try something a bit unorthodox and it doesn't work, you can change it. You know, like but you're not going to move from a conservative option to a, you know, bit of an out there option. You'll never do it, so you'll never get to try it. And to me, that's what allows you to innovate rather than just end up following the staid path the whole time. So I think if you really see that you can step over the anchor rode, it's going to be about here. Particularly if you step up onto this box first, for example, you know, you've almost got this sort of step over, which I could build up as well. You've got the maximum distance for the you know, the road to spool well on the drum. I just think it's a bit of a no-brainer. I think it's actually going to work really well. And you've got to consider that this is a very small space. You're never here. You don't sit here and fish or do anything. It's a tiny space. You just come here to pick up the mooring or drop the anchor. You know, that's it. Okay, I'm going to mark all the bolt holes with a pen now, but I do have the exact measurements to spec from the PDF. So what we'll do is we'll center punch it before we drill using a rule as well. So we'll take this plate home. We're going to have to radius the corners before we weld it, drill, tap, then we'll bring it back out. Here's our stainless exhaust tube. We need to cut this down to 1220 millimeters. Just marking it in a couple of places to guide putting the tape on. Alright, just going to clean up the edges with a flap disc now. Make it easier to insert so it doesn't snag and less chance of cutting myself on it. Now, this is the flat plate I'm going to use for the ladder. 100 and so 1175. So just double checking that the narrowest bit is still 1075, which is the width of our door. So 3 cuts and start welding. Okay, here's our little returns, just coming back enough to hook around the doorway and stop it sliding sideways at all. So we weld those up. Actually, I'll just clean them up as well. I cut them on the bench because I hate the way they flap around when you have them in the air. So there's probably a bit of contamination there to get off before we weld it. So this is the ladder I was given by a friend who didn't need it anymore, which is awesome. Here you can see it's got these pins. I presume it was designed to drop into a larger hole and then move forward in a slot, like a sort of key-shaped hole maybe. What I'm going to do though is cut it off about here, just the thickness of these bits of stainless, and I'm going to drill the stainless, we'll drop the pin in, and then we'll weld it right round and then on the back. Alright, ends of the pins cut off, and they are centre to centre, 277 millimeters apart. Probably the most important thing is we weld it this side so it doesn't end up being a ladder going into the boat. Nice. The flat welds are so much easier than going around the pipe. I've also just welded up the pins that came through as well. Bit of extra strength, not gonna hurt. Okay, let's see how we go. We have a problem. The lower down you come, the further this comes away, obviously, and this arch doesn't actually reach past here. So much in the way we've got this little drainage hole here. I'm thinking we can probably pretty safely cut a little tab into here that it actually slots into. The other option is to notch here slightly, or 50-50, take like 10 mil out of there, 10 mil out of there, so they notch into each other that way. See you, mate. At this point, a mate Rick popped past to have a beer, and he's actually the guy who gave me the ladder, so it was nice for him to see it being installed and being put to use. Feels strong enough. I think it'll do for now. The current's pretty strong and the water's a bit cold, so I don't think I'll go for a swim, but well, thanks for watching. Next week I'm going to push on installing the anchor winch, and then after that we're going to begin fabricating the awning to hold the solar cells over the back deck. Alright, take care, I'll catch you then. See ya. Every day starts with noise at the door. Good morning. You've come all the way up from the front of the block, wanting breakfast, haven't you? You've led these two astray. Come a long way up the hill with your leg. That's impressive. Good morning, Daisy. Thank you for visiting. I should bring your breakfast up here, given you've decided to come up here every morning. Make noise. Good morning, Dottie. You have to wait till I finish my coffee, then I'll get you food. Sorry. Go and find food for yourself for a while. I'll have to figure out which way they come up. I think it's actually beside the house and up round this way, but not sure. Put trackers on you. Anyway, feed yourselves for a bit. Breakfast soon.